Hey, welcome back to another edition of the Supply Chaney podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney, and this is the podcast where we talk to people not just about their practitioner perspectives and what they think of the industry that they happen to be working in the supply chain industry, of course, but we also try to unpack a little bit about who they are just as a human, their dreams and goals, and a little bit about their career paths as well. We really want to just try to have a really holistic view of things here, and I'm really, really honored today to have Greg Braun on today. He's a co-founder and also the CRO of C3 Solutions. We have a lot of founders that come on the show. I would say founders of organizations and companies that are 5 years old, give or take. Greg and the C3 team have been doing this for nearly 26 years, working in the yard and dock management space. So I'm really looking forward to kind of unpacking and delivering some insights. Man, how many logistics puns can you fit into one statement? So, Greg, welcome onto the podcast. If you would take a couple of minutes to just give a quick overview of yourself.
Well, hi. Thanks, Nathan. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of C3 Solutions. C3 is a supply chain execution company that we specialize in the area of yard management and dock scheduling. As you mentioned, we've been doing that for 26 years. We have a new supply chain collaboration product that we've also come up with, which we call C3 Hive, that allow us to kind of join all the pieces together in the supply chain, the pieces that we deal with in the supply chain, which are like the suppliers, the drivers, the customers, all the places where either you receive trailers from or you send trailers to. So yeah, that's like you said, we've been doing this for 26 years. And it's gone very quickly, I'll say.
All right. I guess time flies when you're having fun,
Indeed,
as
it
they say.
does. Yes, it
Well,
does.
I really want to dig into kind of the idea of being a founder and finding a solution, trying to solve problems out there. I also want to dig into the fact that you're the CRO and a little bit about the marketing and sales element in supply chain and logistics.
Mhm.
But before we get through all of that, can you tell us just a little about, Greg the younger, where you grew up, what life was like, what kind of kid were you? Were you the bookworm or the sports kid, or, paint us a little bit of a picture there of Greg.
Well, Nathan, C3 is based in Montreal, so I've lived in Montreal most of my adult life, but I grew up in Western Canada, in Saskatchewan. So, which for your American audience, that would be for me. The U.S. was Montana, so we were just straight north of Montana, and I grew up actually on a farm. And as a kid, I would say I wasn't a bookworm, but I was into sports quite a bit. I wasn't the best athlete. I was one of those okay athletes, but I was also into music a lot. So I was one of those kids that was I was good enough to be on all the sports teams, and I was one of the musicians that, let's say, the school band depended on and so forth. So I would always have those conflicts in football season or hockey season. It would be like, do you miss the hockey game, or do you miss the concert or whatever? So yeah, I was always torn between those two worlds, which there weren't a lot of us that were in both of those. So yeah, that was my kind of my youth, if you will.
All right.
And
What was your instrument of choice?
Well, I had two kind of instruments. There was the symphonic side, and then I had the fun side. On the symphonic side, I played the French horn, which again is a bit of an obscure instrument, but that was I thoroughly enjoyed that as a kid. And then, but on the fun side, I played the bass guitar. So I was also as well as being a symphonic musician. I was in a rock band almost all of my high school career. So a garage band that we would play gigs every so often, type of thing. So yeah, that was yeah. So on the one side, guitar, the bass guitar, vocals, and then symphonically, the French horn.
Well, that maybe that's why we get along so well. I also was a French horn player,
Oh,
but
wow.
actually not on purpose. It was first trumpet all of middle school and high school, and yeah, you're too.
Same thing, same thing. You know what? And that, looking back at it, it was always the kids that were, because every band instructor, no one chooses the French horn; it
uh
chooses you, right? So, or the band director decides we're a little short on French horns. This guy's maybe a bit of a weak trumpet player. At least that's my position, I think. And this is maybe I should transition him to the French horn. Anyhow, yeah, I did the same thing.
So my story goes, actually, I was applying to be on the trumpet line, in freshman year of college, and it already had 35 trumpets, but they needed more
Yeah,
French horns. So they said, "We'll give you a full college scholarship if you will play the French horn." And I said, "All right, I just got to switch hands, I guess, right?" So
no, exactly.
that was it.
No, and I never regretted that actually. I quite preferred the French horn at the end, but yeah, so be it.
So the school I went to was actually so small we did not have a football team. But I remember in my younger years I did go to one of those schools, and I remember seeing the marching bands and having football players at halftime and marching like in their football uniform, instead of being in the dugout with the team. But you were talking symphony, so I guess you weren't in your hockey gear or football gear on the symphony stage playing French horn.
No, no, we didn't. In Canada, the marching band thing, we would have our 4th of July is the 1st of July, so we would have to practice every May, June, so that we could, do the marching band in on July 1st for the parade. But we were mostly symphonic, so we would be, we weren't marching. We weren't playing at events, at school events and so forth. Football games and so forth. So there was never that direct conflict. It was more there's a performance that needs to be done, or you go to the big game, or you play at the big game.
I see. I see. Okay. All right. So Saskatchewan, you grew up on the farm there.
Yeah.
What kinds of things did you farm? I grew up on a farm in Texas. We had hay and cows, but what do you farm in Saskatchewan?
Well, in Saskatchewan, at least in when I grew up, it's changed a bit today. But when I grew up, it was my dad's farm was a grain farm, so we farmed primarily wheat, durum, and barley. But my dad was opportunistic, so every so often we would also have feeder cattle if there was, the price of cattle went up and so forth. So, but we were primarily a grain farm. So, but I've been in Texas a lot, and there's a lot of similarities to say Western Canada and northern or even Texas in general, and it's very similar actually. Culturally, it's very similar.
Interesting. Maybe even including the oil and gas energy
Exactly.
sector.
Oil and gas is a big thing in southwestern Saskatchewan, southeastern Alberta. So yeah, I grew up. I was about a 2-hour drive from the Alberta border. So yeah, the town I grew up was Swift Current, commonly known as Speedy Creek. And it's known for all of the actual professional hockey players that came out of Swift Current. So I've shown my sons every so often my junior high football team photo where there were 4 guys on that football team that made the NHL, if you can imagine. So and that's a town of like 15,000 people. So yeah, it's known for its hockey players that come out of there. So as a hockey player, unless you're like extremely good, you were nothing. So I mean, you just gave up on hockey fairly quickly.
All right. Yeah, it's a pretty clear go or no go decision, I
Exactly.
guess then. All
Exactly.
right. Well, let's talk a little bit about, as you were growing up, did you have a job? Did you work, as a high schooler? I like to hear about what people's first jobs were. I think it's always a fun indicator of where they're going to
Yeah.
go later in life.
Well, Nathan, you're going to think this was, well, it sounds a bit too cliche, but if you, I actually worked on a dock loading trucks. That was my high school job. Well, I worked for a trucking company for two summers. One was, I mean, as a farm kid, I worked with my dad all the time, right? But once I was 16 and had my driver's license, I told my dad I want to work somewhere else now. So I worked for a trucking company, and the first first summer I worked for them, I was loading trucks, working on a cross dock. Which the only reason I did that, it was the best paying job there was. So it was, a Teamsters union job. So of which, hey, I was getting paid a lot, and the main reason they hired me, and one of my buddies was working there, and he said, hey, you should apply because they really like farm kids. So if you apply, you'll probably get a job right away. So I did, and yeah, the guy said, oh yeah, okay, cool, start working whenever. So I was working a night shift at a crosstalk. The next summer, I was driving a straight body. So, and I was studying, and I was going to university in commerce. So I was, wanting to go in business, and I'm thinking, and all my other friends are kind of working in their domain and so forth. And here I am driving a truck, and it was paid well, but you know, at that time, I'm thinking this is completely irrelevant. And little did I know, the first job I get out of university was working in trucking software. So
You know,
my
I
entire career has been involved in the trucking industry.
Yeah, no, I mean that's amazing. A lot of times I'll ask people, and they say they mowed yards, or they worked in a restaurant and that sort of thing. It's not often that I see someone who turns out to be a lifelong, logistics and supply chain professional, literally start their career that way as well. That's
Yeah,
really
but that
fun.
wasn't by design though. But that's purely coincidental that happened
Hmm.
like that. But hey, I mean it um it worked out. I mean, and
Right.
that, you talk about, that would have been in, I don't know, I thought would have been like 1978 or 1979. So that was pretty, you're talking information technology. I mean, they had these teletype machines, like, we would basically be doing crosstalk on line hauls, right? So the originating location from the line haul they would send the bills over, right? So that the line haul would show up at our crosstalk, and the foreman would have to pull the bills, which basically this teletype machine would print out all the pro bills, so we would be able to crosstalk, right? So anyhow, it was there was no technology really. Everything was pen and paper, more or less. Well, pen and paper or teletypes, fax, whatever.
Right. Not stone tablets. You were before or after that
Just
age.
it was just after the stone tablets. But
I see.
yeah,
So, and I think I'm seeing that you start out on the IT and tech side of transportation at the time.
yeah, I did. I mean, I went to university at the University of Saskatchewan. I got a bachelor's degree in commerce, but I had a specialty in computer science, and I quite enjoyed computer science. It's one of those first year. I had my first year of commerce. I wanted to touch all of the different you know fields within commerce, and one of them was computer science. And I liked it. That was the thing I liked the most. So having a specialty in computer science, I was kind of between the Department of Commerce and Computer Science Department. So yeah, and again, that wasn't something as a kid I said, oh, I really want to be into computers. It was just university. It's like, hey, I like this the most. So, um, my first job coming out of university, then I was actually a programmer, um, working for a company that was doing, again, trucking software, which was, I said, hey, I know a little bit about that. So there you go.
I appreciate that you said you also were a driver as well.
Yeah,
So I feel like how can you have more credibility, kind of doing what you're doing now, than saying your first jobs were working on a dock and driving trucks. Like
yeah,
you've kind of covered all the bases, and now with the computer science as well. So
yeah. So yeah, so then when what got me from Saskatchewan to Quebec, which again, if you know your Canadian geography, it's a very long distance between those two places. It's not something where you just think, I think I'm just going to go to Quebec tomorrow if you live in Saskatchewan. I was working for this software company whose largest customer was Robert Transport in Quebec. So I won't go into all the details, but ultimately I ended up working for Robert Transport in their computer department. And Robert Transport is one of the largest, still is one of the largest trucking companies in Quebec and in Canada, really. So yeah, I just went from the software business to actually, working for a huge operator. So yeah.
Tell us a little about, your time there working within a transportation. Did you look at the problem differently? Like kind of what was the role like differently going from the pure software play to being, the IT guy, I guess, in the trucking company?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it was very similar. I mean, in fact, the software that I had been working on when I was, working for the software company was the same software. It's just now instead of trying to accommodate all the customers in the market, you were focused on one customer, on one company, the one you work for. And Robert Transport is a very dynamic company. They touched a lot of different things. Sometimes people almost refer to them as a 3PL, which they do a lot of warehousing and so forth. So yeah, a lot of challenges. I mean, you're talking now early 90s. You've got Qualcomm type solutions, which was, you know, that was fairly, that was fairly innovative at the time to say that, hey, now we've got in-cab technology. We can communicate with drivers. How is that going to affect dispatch? So yeah, it was a great experience. That was, and the, Robert Transport is a company that was really driven by their founder. He's just an incredible entrepreneur. It was a really great experience to work closely with someone with that kind of drive and vision. So,
I can imagine it's inspirational, particularly if you go on to be an entrepreneur yourself. Having been in that kind of environment, to that ecosystem. I think it is always, as long as you took a couple notes, I guess, right, on what you
yeah, yeah,
saw, and how you would do things different, and
yeah.
the things you want to share, and then you would go on to be a co-founder and build something yourself. I'm curious, what was it that kind of started leading into to going and finding this problem and trying to solve it yourself?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing was actually Robert, the C3 product initially was was developed at Robert. Essentially, Robert Transport wanted to do dock schedule, or they wanted to do yard management for their customers, right? So, and at that time, we're talking about mid '90s now. There was no such thing as yard management. I mean, even Wi-Fi was a proprietary thing, right? There was no such thing as just get on even private Wi-Fi was not that obvious, right? So, at that time we actually developed a system with the help of an outside company that was, we had green screens in jockey trucks, and we were managing the yard with wireless systems, which at that time was pretty. We're talking again mid '90s. There weren't a lot of people doing that kind of thing. Um, and it was one of the, I would say, the showcase facility for Robert Transport. Had this system was running there, and they had all of the Fortune 500 type companies, and they would be visiting that showcase site, and they'd see this system and say, "Wow, this is amazing. I'd love to have a system. Where'd you get this system?" And it was like, "Well, we developed it ourselves." So essentially what happened is, and it was never developed to be a commercial product. So eventually, with a lot of this feedback, the owner of Robert Transport decided, hey, let's make a commercial version of this that we can use to kind of provide a turnkey yard management system. And today there are companies that do that, right? They manage the yard, and they have their own software and everything. So that's what Robert Transport was doing again in the late '90s now. So that became successful enough that, and the outside firm we used is the other co-founder of C3. It was his company that developed the software, Nicholas Couture. And so then at one point, and it was actually the owner of Robert Transport that said, "Hey, you guys should make a company out of this." That's how C3 got started back 26 years ago.
Wow, what
Yeah,
a story!
I
What a
know.
story! It's hard to put all that, in a quick little note card that you
Oh,
explain in a
yeah.
in a booth
Funny,
at
yeah.
a conference, right?
Yeah, no, that's yeah, and I've given you the Reader's Digest version of that story too.
Yeah. So, I've seen this kind of story happen where you've got someone who is a trucking company or a warehouse company or something that they start doing this other they build their own solution, they kind of figure out what works for them, and then other people see it and it gets so much interest that you're able to pull this apart and make it a company on its own and share that solution with others. So really, really cool to
Yeah,
see, that story kind of unfold with you and to get to talk to you about being part of that.
yeah.
Um, so you've kind of already had it. Was there any like thing major, I guess, change for you personally in your career as you went from being at the transport company working on that software to then like kind of helping to stand up, I guess, this thing on its own two legs?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a big change, right? I mean, there was kind of no more safety net, if you will. When we broke off, is like, and the product existed, but it was still a very abbreviated. There was still, it existed and it was sellable, but it still needed a lot more work, if you will. So, and the yard management market then not I mean, it's definitely gotten bigger today, but in those days, there was really nothing. The, um the only companies that could really justify having a yard management system just because of the fact that you needed to install your own Wi-Fi network, which that usually costs far more than the actual software that you were gonna be buying. Um, so it was a very, very costly venture. So to be able to justify that, you needed to be a very large operation, right? So we're talking in terms of yard drivers. If you didn't have at least 5 drivers, it was like going to be a tough sell to pay for it, right? So it was a very, very sparse market. Like there weren't a lot of opportunities out there, right? So, and the sales cycle, and even today, the sales cycle is way too long. But in those days, it was, again, like it wasn't odd to have a 18-month sales cycle, right? So, as a small company who you kind of surviving hand to mouth, that was not, it was challenging, right? So, in some ways, the work, in my last years at Robert Transport, I was effectively doing a sales support role. Um, and so that transition from that to C3 wasn't that different. It was just the whole situation of now you basically, you eat what you kill, right? So, it was, there was that element which was at the first years was interesting, right? So
Well, hey, we're still here. We're talking about it today.
we
So
are
something went right.
definitely.
So tell me a little bit about then, I guess the solution, that C3 provides and how, kind of how it started and how we got to where we are and what y'all are up to today.
Well, we initially the product again, if we look at 26 years ago, what the platform, this technology at the time, SaaS wasn't a thing, right? It was all on premise. So we eventually transitioned into the SaaS. We started with doc scheduling in SaaS, which made a lot of sense. Appointment scheduling, that was in around the 2010 timeframe. And we were still our kind of our marquee product at the time was a product called YardSmart, and that product around 2017 is when we put it in the cloud as well. So we totally redid it, and it was all. So then the doc scheduling and the Yard product were all on the same platform. It was all SaaS. So yeah, I mean, we as a product, we essentially have. In those days, we had two types of customers. One that had the real serious yard management requirement, which again, these are companies that ultimately depended on yard management. So the yard was something that was mission critical for them. So we do all of the. I mean, the key things you're getting out of yard management is, the trailer visibility, product visibility, the product in those trailers, the visibility on all that, and so that because the classic situation was most companies after the product was bought, from that time till the time it arrived in the warehouse, you essentially lost visibility on it. So we filled that gap Then there's obviously with these larger operations, the whole concept of optimizing the labor aspect. So the yard driver optimization, because in a yard operation, those hostler trucks, or in Canada we call them shunter, or in the rest of the world we call them shunters. That's the biggest cost component, right? It's not only the vehicles, all the maintenance to it, and then usually in a big operation, you've got 2 to 3 drivers on a truck at all times, or in a day. So two drivers in a day. So you put all that cost together, that's a significant component, and you have like 5 to 10 of those running at one time. We would usually, well, we usually today even improve that by 30% or so, improve the productivity. So you've got the visibility, you've got the optimization, and then you've just put order into the area of the business, which is usually quite chaotic, right? So that's the yard piece. The dock scheduling is the pre-arrival essentially to the yard, but we have a lot of customers at C3 that only do the scheduling piece, right? So essentially, again, and I guess our typical customer would be the kind of customer that has a fairly complex operation. So think of a grocery retailer, where you've got buyers purchasing product from suppliers. And there's a lot of different types of product coming in at any given time. So it's not really a situation of, well, hey, just bring it in whenever. Every one of our customers has some pretty stringent rules in terms of when's the optimal time to bring that product in. What kind of, there are certain types of loads I want to avoid having a certain number of them. I want them to only show up at a certain time in the shift. I want to measure the reliability of that, or the reliability of my vendors when they bring their product. How, are they complying to my merchandising policy? All these kind of things that need to be managed, and they want to do that as efficiently as possible. So ideally, the vendor or the carrier is making that appointment and it's being automatically approved, but yet in a way that is still optimal for the business to kind of optimize the dock throughput, right? So those are I guess historically our two key products. Now with our C3 Hive product, what we've done with that is that's where we're now communicating, well, to drivers. So it's the first kind of volley, I guess, in C3 Hive was where the driver now uses he gets a login to, or sign up to C3 Hive. And it's not an app, it's just it's a dynamic web application that shows up in his browser. So he's able then to expedite his arrival process when he shows up on site. And now we're able to also integrate him into these in-yard workflows. So for example, if it's a driver with a live load, he's going to bring it, back it up, and the office wants him to deliver his keys so they can safely unload his truck to make sure that he's not going to drive away. So that's the kind of thing that a lot of our customers in the past, they would capture the driver's phone number, before they implemented C3 Hive, and they would be calling him all the time to say, hey, your paperwork's ready. Hey, bring your keys into the transport office. You can pull your trailer out now. All these kind of things are now facilitated with C3 Hive. So we're in constant contact with the driver. We can get feedback from the driver as well, while he's on site. And some of the things, and we're going to be announcing this next week. We're having a user event where we're going to be announcing a new version of Hive, which is going to be connecting a lot of the other entities that our customers deal with. And so that what I'm talking about there is things like delivering to stores. You want to have you want your stores to have visibility, or it could be just customers in general. You may have other hubs which they're not large enough to have a system in place there, but yet you still want to be able to either shuttle vehicles between them. But they're all already part of your network, but it's just they're not large enough to kind of facilitate putting a full blown system in there. So that's all going to fall under the umbrella of C3 Hive. So we're going to be doing a lot more of that route planning and dealing with things outside of the yard to a certain degree.
All
Outside of
right.
the yard, but still directly related to the yard.
Yes. Gotcha. I appreciate how you've kind of painted this picture for me in my head now that at the and it's obvious, but really the way that you've put it has just sparked this concept in me that because a dock in a yard is really the handoff between a supplier and the buyer,
Yeah.
and you need to facilitate that transaction with as much transparency and as much efficiency as possible, or else, if things go wrong in that handoff, then yeah, it can be a problem, particularly in a space where it's grocery or food or particularly important goods.
Well, you know what? Exactly. And I recall some of the biggest, some of our first go lives we did with, say, major grocery retailers. And one of them, in fact, was in Texas. And I remember the senior project sponsor kind of basically said, guys, if you mess this up, the shelves are going to be bare. So that can't happen. That's not an option. We had another market that we cater to a lot is national mail services. We deal with the national service in the UK, and again, the senior project sponsor said, guys, no pressure here, but if you fail, and this was back in the day when people actually got checks in the mail, if you guys fail, pensioners aren't going to get their checks, right? So no pressure, right? Um, so yeah, it's a critical link that exists between what that distribution center is, what its primary function is, and the consumers or the customers of that center, right? So, and if the yard doesn't work well, they're not served well.
Right. Curious, there's a question that I ask most of my guests that are in a particular space in the industry, and it is supply chain visibility. This keyword of visibility, of knowing where is what and going what's happening. I'm curious, how do you define that? From the C3 perspective, what does supply chain visibility mean? How do y'all approach that?
Well, for us, supply chain, what supply chain visibility means is, again, we start the process from the point that the buyer hands it over to the supplier, right? So from that point on, what we want to be able to provide our customers is even before that. That supplier now is going to make an appointment, right? So what our goal is now to provide our customers who are managing the warehouse to give them as much visibility as possible. So the obvious one is, okay, the appointment's been made, but has that supplier now picked up? Have they scheduled a pickup for that delivery, right? So it's one thing to know that delivery appointment's been made, but Mr. Carrier or Mr. Supplier, have you already set up that pickup? And can you give that visibility to me? So for us, that's where kind of that visibility starts. Now, do we continue that along with the driver? So the driver right at the point of pickup, he can subscribe, or even before that, he can subscribe to that delivery to say, okay, I'm on my way, all is good. And then at any point, they can update, or it can be done automatically to say, hey, this driver's he's not gonna make his ETA. He's not gonna make his appointment time. So there's that aspect of things. And then it's simply, now the driver's arrived. And how do we expedite that arrival process? Because again, a lot of our customers, and more so, are getting into, I want to be able to make sure that the driver that is arriving is the actual, he's got all the credentials to be here. Driver induction is starting to be a much more, he's got the credentials to be here. He's been properly informed on what he needs to do when he's here. And we have also customers that manage very, very high value goods. So they are very, very concerned about security. So if you don't have your credentials, if you can't prove that, yes, you have been granted this move through C3 Hive, if you don't have that, you're not getting into the facility, right? So that visibility there when we're actually checking in the drivers, and then on the way out, are we delivering to so I mentioned already the in-yard visibility. We want to know where that driver is and be able to communicate to him as effectively as possible. And now when we leave the site, oftentimes, again, if it's kind of a micro move that our customer has, and maybe the customer doesn't have a TMS, or in this case, they're not managing the transport, so they don't need a classic TMS, right? But they still want to know did their customer get the goods, right? So the drivers left the site. Did the customer get the goods? So, we try and close that loop as well, so that we can give our customers that added assurance that yes, that product's arrived at your customer site, because the driver has the ability to say, okay, I've crossed this geofence. I'm here now. Your customer's got his stuff.
That's I've talked to a lot of folks in this space, and that's the first I've really thought about closing the loop and getting closure for that, that site to know, yes, we didn't just send a truck into the ether and we don't know what
Yeah.
happened next, right? So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, and a lot of our customers, they manage that themselves, right? They may have a TMS or whatever, it's kind of a system that manages, but surprisingly enough, there's a lot of companies that don't. And they're kind of, well, is my operation big enough to really do this, or to warrant having a full-blown TMS? And again, that's where we're finding that there's value to be added with a system like our C3 Hive to be able to kind of close that loop.
I'm curious, Greg, you all have been in this business for a while, and I imagine that you all do some surveys, that you've got some insights and intel because of y'all's position and the amount of time y'all have been providing the solution. Do y'all do any sort of surveys or whatnot of your customers or the market and share insights?
Actually, Nathan, we do. We have done actually for the last 2 years. We just came out with a new. We started in 2025, and what we've done is we hired a group, an independent group, to do these surveys, and we did our first one last year, and we did it again this year. And yeah, it's. I mean, it wasn't a massive survey, but it was just kind of a bit of a kind of a pulse on what's happening in the industry. What are operators thinking? What are their biggest challenges? That kind of thing. So yeah, it's our second year now.
All right. Could you mind sharing some insights from that, I
Well,
guess?
yeah, I mean, I mean, first of all, I would encourage anyone to go on our website and they can download the survey, get all the details. But in general, the thing that's come out of this, Nathan, is, and it kind of, for me, it's a bit of a deja vu. It's like we're going back 26 years, and in some ways, I hate to say it, but things haven't changed that much from 26 years ago. I mean, technology obviously has changed a lot, right? But the buyers' attitudes or operators, they're 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 falling back on manual a lot, and a lot of this, the survey really makes sense, because I can tell you, almost even still today, we're signing up new customers. We're going in. We're not replacing an existing software system. We're replacing a manual operation. So, and that's what the search, that's are some of the key things. That's some of the key things the survey has pointed out to us. So that, when operators are confronted with their peak operational seasons, we had some statistics like 51% of them are falling back on manual procedures. Another large percentage of them were going to temp labor. That was the way they were dealing with these, peak volumes, and only 30% of them, or 34% of them, were using technology, which, even for me now, 34% might seem high, I think, from what I've been seeing. So, and one of the other things that was interesting that came out of it, one of the key points, is that we had a question of, now, are you planning on, or do you intend on, or are you looking at yard management systems? And 72% said that they were actively exploring dock or yard management automation, but only 19% of them, no, sorry, 12% of them had a plan in place to actually achieve that. And again, that to me makes perfect sense, because we see it all the time. Um, we see a lot of companies out there that are looking for a silver bullet, right? So they have a yard problem, which is not surprising, but they somehow, they're hoping that there's some kind of magic solution out there that they can find, which, if they buy it, all their problems are going to go away. As opposed to, no one would have that position. If, I need a warehouse management system, right? There's a lot of work to procure that system. There's a lot of work to implement that system, and then make sure that it's constantly being used properly, and so forth. For whatever reason, a lot of people don't think that applies to the yard. They can just somehow there's this silver bullet they can get, and everything's going to be great. And there's about 10% of the people out there that They have a very structured purchasing process, and they treat the yard like they would treat any other area of the business. So that part of the survey, I found it was a bit harsh, but I thought, that's pretty much the reality.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting tidbits that came out of there. Again, I encourage people to go and download it, but that's kind of the main thing, that people are still pretty manual. Um, so,
Okay.
and
The thing I heard most right there was that it's felt like whenever times got tough at peak seasons, when it's actually most crucial to make sure you have structure and
yeah,
process and don't lose visibility of things in the chaos, that is when people kind of resort back to bad habits and former
yeah,
ways
yeah.
of and processes. So there seems like an opportunity there if someone can figure that
Yeah,
one out.
well, and I know exactly. And I mean, essentially what you saw is that people that to be able to react properly during that peak, you need to plan at least 12 months in advance, right? So, and interestingly, one of the other points that came out is one of the biggest drivers was the whole, or the things that people stressed the most was software implementation. That was one of the things that they found the most important, was to get the key value out of their investment in software, was a good implementation process. So that was also that kind of fit in as well. So the folks that are doing it know that you need to invest in that implementation process properly to get maximum value, obviously. So yeah,
Right. Yeah, very logical. Um, well, Greg, I loved hearing about you growing up on a farm in
yep,
Saskatchewan, being a French horn player like myself as well, but also being cool and being a bass guitarist, and just kind of hearing about your career path from working on the dock to being a truck driver to spending time in a trucking company and now at C3. It's really just all a really fascinating story. It's the kind of stories that I love to hear and to share. As we wrap up today, any kind of last words of wisdom you'd like to leave with the audience before we wrap up?
well, no, I can. I don't necessarily know if I have any words of wisdom, but I know I'll just say, Nathan, it's been a very enjoyable conversation. Um, again, it's been a passion of mine ever since, since I got out of university, working, well, since I was in high school, working in this whole area of supply chain. Um, and anybody out there that's saying, hey, you know what, I think our yard operations could be run better, I totally encourage you to come to our website. Love to kind of show you our product, show how we do things, and kind of go down that road with them. So yeah, I mean, we've been 26 years at C3, and I think I mean, we're feeling like a startup today. I mean, again, with the way things are happening right now and with AI and everything, we're totally embracing it. And I don't, I think all of my colleagues at C3 can agree with this one, is C3, as much as we're a 26-year-old company, we don't feel that old. We're having a lot of fun.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on and sharing some of your story with us and with the audience today. And I'll see you around.
It's been a pleasure, Nathan. Thanks a lot.
All right.